Hello, I'm Stu. I'm now into month 2 of my personal quest to update my certs to a more modern City and Guilds 2365, starting of course with level 2. Rather than giving a weekly or bi-weekly update, I thought it'd just be simpler now to go through what we did in class each month and draw some diagrams to show what we've done in class, putting it across to you visually rather than just me rambling at the camera. The drawings I'm about to show you are based on the activities that we did in class and the rigs that we had to make. But first, an addendum to my last video. Last time I loosely described R1 plus R2 testing before again loosely describing insulation resistance testing. R1 R2 testing is not the only test you can or should do. You can also do R1 plus Rn tests, which involve the line and neutral continuity, as well as ring final testing, which is a whole suite of different tests, which I'll cover in a future video. I only talked about R1 plus R2 and insulation resistance testing last time, as that's all that's required at this stage in the 2365. Later in training, and indeed in the real world, you would do additional testing on top of those. With that out of the way, let's get back to lighting circuits, and specifically two-way switching. That's what we did first week of February, and that carried on for a couple of weeks with two-way and then two-way plus intermediate switching. A bit more exciting than single lighting circuits, and of course a little bit more complicated, two-way lighting, or having two switches, either of which can be on or off to control one or more lights, does seem to catch a few people out, particularly homeowners where the installer borrowed a neutral from whatever light they can find rather than taking the neutral back down to the correct light. You know who you are. This can cause nuisance tripping and can also, in certain circumstances, make lights live when they shouldn't be, which can of course be dangerous. And then the other trip up is where a homeowner has gone to their favorite DIY store, bought a new shiny chrome or brass or retro light switch. They've taken the old light switch off the wall, all three wires in the back are red, and they've no idea which way they go. They put the wires in 2, 3, 4 different ways. Sometimes the light comes on, sometimes the light doesn't work at all, sometimes the light doesn't switch off, and then ultimately they have to phone an electrician to come and fix it. So this week the syllabus was two-way lighting using 3-core plus CPC cable, where the loop in and loop out of the switch is more or less the same as before, but there are extra colours and extra connections to deal with. So let's head over now to the whiteboard where I try and go all John Ward on you and draw lighting circuits. One-way lighting, you have, here in the UK, there's a couple of methods of doing it. The one I'm going to draw today is called the 3-plate method, which is also known as loop through pendant. So you've got in the pendant, this is what goes into the ceiling, this is normally what the light dangles down from. You've got a neutral, a line, and a switch line. And then you've got a light switch itself. Now the light switch can have 3 terminals on, and quite often two-way switches have the 3 terminals. You can even have light switches with 4 terminals on. Now that's a couple of different things. We'll get into that another time. But for today's purposes, I'm just going to do 2 connections, and they're going to be known as the common connection and L1. And then also connected to the pendant, you have some sort of light, like so. So how do all these connect up? Well, coming in from the fuse box distribution board, somewhere in the ceiling, you have 3 wires inside a cable. You have live, neutral, and earth, also known as CPC. These are inside either rubber cables or, most commonly here in the UK, twin earth cables or twin and CPC cables. This will come in from the fuse box, and the first place this goes in this method is the line goes to the middle connection inside the ceiling pendant, like so. The lid's coming off the pen. The neutral goes into the neutral block on the pendant, and you also have a earth block. And if you imagine the light switch is inside a back box of some description in the wall, that will also have a earth block. So we'll draw that in as well. So there's your line, neutral, and earth. So now you've got them into the ceiling rose or pendant. How do they then connect to the switch and to the light? Well, let's do the light first. So the line, or live for the light, goes from the switch line terminal, and that goes into one side of a light. And then you've got from the neutral side of the pendant, you've got the neutral for the light. Okay, nearly there. But now we've got live and switch live, and they're separate. So how do we connect those together? Well, of course, that is. So a feed comes from the live or line, usually into the common of the switch. In the UK is the twin and earth cable. So that will have a blue. So what you do is you connect from L1, the blue. I have to cross over here now and offend people's OCD, sorry about that. It goes to the switch line. But this blue is actually a line, it's actually live, because it's not neutral, it carries the live from the switch to the switch line. So what we do is we get some brown sleeving and put the brown sleeving over both ends. And that tells the installer and any future sparks that go into this that it is a switched line and to be treated as live. Electricity comes in on the line, goes through to the loop terminal, down from the loop terminal into the switch. And for completeness, we'll draw the earth, which goes into the back box of the switch like so. And if you imagine these are in a grey twin and earth cable, or white, you can get white twin and earth cable, and so are those. When you flick the switch, so let's draw the switch off like so, and then you come in and you press the switch comes on, and it connects these two connections together in the switch. The current comes in through the live, through the loop terminal, down to the switch, through the switch, up through the neutral wire, which is now a switch line, to the switch line terminal of the pendant, to the light, through the light, back through the neutral, and then back to the what's called the origin distribution board, fuse box, etc. Now that works perfectly for one light, one connection, one switch. If you wanted to add a second light into this, so maybe you've got two lights in a kitchen or a hallway or something like that. Neutral, line, switch line, earth. You could take another feed, so you would take a piggyback feed, if you will, of earth, a piggyback feed of neutral, and then if you wanted both lights controlled by the same switch, you could take a feed from switch lines. You'd have to double up on this connection, and then you would take a connection to switch line. And of course here you would have the light. That's an amazing picture of a light. That goes into there. Neutral comes out to there. And now what happens is when you switch this one switch, the current goes to the switch line terminal of this first pendant and goes to a second pendant. Both lights will come on. So that is one-way lighting. That is one switch and a number of lights. But what if you wanted to have another switch? So let's pretend now that this is in a different room. So you've got common, L1. Let's pretend now that this is a different room. So I'm just going to very quickly Okay, so now we've got our original setup again. So we've got one switch, one pendant, one light. But let's say this is now in a different room. How would we connect that? Well, the neutral and earth would connect as before. So neutral and earth would connect from the ceiling rows. In fact, let's draw that going into the ceiling rows, because that's normally what happens, because you've got three connections here. So you've got a loop in and a loop out, and then this goes to the next ceiling rows. And then now you've got this live or line problem here. So instead of connecting the incoming feed to the switch line, the incoming feed connects to the loop in terminal of the last pendant, the next pendant, and also connects to the loop out terminal of the first pendant. So you've got the line coming in, loops out, and then you've got the neutral coming in, loops out. This switch, because it only connects to this switch line terminal here, only controls this light. So for this light, we can do the same thing again. We can take a feed from the loop terminal down to the common. We can take a neutral feed, let's draw it this way this time, into the switch line terminal. We can put some sheathing inside the switch and inside the back box, like so. And now this switch will only control this light. This switch will only control this light. Let's put the earth in as well for completeness. And this very rough and ready diagram is what's called loop in pendant, or the three-plate method. The more modern way of doing it, and I'll use that term loosely, is to use what's called loop in switch. Now, loop in switch is very similar to loop through the pendant. You can have two pendants. We'll draw two switches. Now, the main advantage, of course, of connecting through the switch is that you get a neutral in the switch, and as such you can use smart switches, dimmers, touch screens, a whole plethora of modern technologies that people are putting in smart homes. We have line, neutral, and earth, or CPC. And they come in from the origin of the installation, but this time they go through the switch. Line will come in, and the line will go to the common of the first switch. And the line loops out of the first switch and goes to the common connection of the second switch. The earth comes in as well, so the earth will go to the back box of the switch. So the earth comes in, that's all lovely. The earth loops out and goes to the next switch. We'll come back to neutral in a minute. In the pendant, you've still got the same wiring as before, so you've got the live or line coming out of the switch line, and you've still got the neutral for the light coming out of the neutral side of the pendant, and we'll draw those in here. Okay. The L1 terminal on the switch still goes up to the pendant, but this time, because we're not taking the feed from the pendant, we can actually use the brown or the live or the line wire. We can take that from L1 up to the switch line terminal, and L1 up to the switch line terminal. So now the live comes in, or the line comes in, goes to the common, through the switch, out of L1 and into the switch line terminal, through the light or lamp, and to the neutral side. How does it get back to the switch? Well, this is where the loop in switch happens. So you have the neutral coming into the switch, and then this will normally go into some sort of terminal block. Let's draw that here. And then there'll be a terminal block on the other switch as well. And this is normally inside the back box. The feed neutral will come into the terminal block, will loop out of the terminal block and go to the next switch, and so on and so on. The neutral from the light will come down the same twin and CPC cable and connect into the neutral block. And it could be a push fit connector, it could be a terminal block, it could be a Wago. Other manufacturers are available, but that would normally go inside the back box. And for completeness, we'll draw the earth terminals as well. However, usually earth is omitted on these diagrams for clarity, but we'll draw it in at this stage. So you've got one twin and earth, twin and CPC cable going up to the light. You've got one twin and earth cable coming into the switch, and you've got one twin and earth cable going out of the switch into the next switch. So how does this work? Let's quickly go through it. Nothing in the loop of the ceiling rose or ceiling pendant. Line comes in, goes to the switch, switch is closed, current comes out of L1, through the live wire, through the light, lamp, luminaire. These are all terms that you'll have to learn and use. Through the neutral, out of the neutral, down, through the terminal block, and back to the origin. For the next switch, it loops through, goes to common, switch is closed, out of the switch of L1, to the ceiling rose, through the light, through the neutral, down, terminal block, and back to the origin. And that is the loop-in switch method. So that takes us up to the end of the last video and what I've been doing at the training centre. Two-way switching often catches people out, particularly DIY Daves and homeowners who go to their local DIY store, buy a two-way switch, and what they find is the two-way switch has three connections in the back, common, L1 and L2. So they'll have three terminals in the back of the switch. And they go, oh, what to do? Because quite often, all the wires that are in the back box, well, they're all brown. Or if you've got an older installation, the three wires in the back box, well, they could all be red. Where do they go then? Because you've never made a note of which one went where. Usually we don't have sleeving on because back in the 70s and 80s, electricians just didn't bother doing that. Where do these go? You connect two of them together. Sometimes the light comes on, sometimes the light doesn't work at all, and then you pick up the phone and you call somebody in to help. Let's get rid of the red because we're in modern colours. But two-way switching has two switches, common, L1, L2, three terminals. You have a second switch over here. I'm going to draw it a bit further away, for reasons that will become clear later. Common, L1, L2. Three terminals. You still have a pendant dangling from your ceiling. It's still got the three sets of terminals. So you've still got neutral, you've still got loop in, and you've still got switch line. And you've still got your light. The neutral goes to one side of your lamp, your bulb, your fluorescent tube, whichever one it is, and the line goes to the other side. That's still the same. The supply will come in to the pendant. So just as before, the line would go to the loop in. The neutral would go to the neutral terminal on the pendant, and the earth would connect to the earth block. Let's pretend, for the sake of argument now, that the earth goes everywhere else. These three switches need to be connected together. And the cable that is normally used for that has got three cores plus an earth in. There will be a brown. There will be a black. There will also be a grey. Now I can't draw grey, so I'm going to draw grey as a dotted line because I haven't got a grey pen. And you also get earth. So this is why it's called 3-core plus CPC, or 3-core plus earth, because there's three wires in this one. There's no blue, there's no neutral, And how these connect is usually the brown will connect to the common on both switches. L1, now L1 and L2, it doesn't matter which way around you do this. But for simplicity, I'm going to do L1 to the grey, and I'll do that on this side as well. And then L2 connects to the black wire. So now you've got all three terminals connected together. The commons on both switches are connected together by the brown. L1 is connected together by the grey, although it doesn't actually matter. L2 is connected together by the black, although again, doesn't actually matter. Because these are live conductors, you will put some brown sleeving on them. So inside of each terminal, you should have some brown sleeving. And that identifies to the installer and to the next electrician that these are live or line carrying cables. So how do you get that to the light? Well, you've got a normal twin and earth cable going from usually the first switch up to the light. And what we can do is we can connect the brown of the twin and earth to say L1, and that will go into the loop in terminal on the pendant. And then the blue wire on the twin and earth, well, that would connect to L2. So you connect that to L2, and that would go to the switch line terminal in the pendant. And again, because it's a line current carrying conductor, you would sleeve it with brown. You would also have earth as well. So how do these switches work in the real world? Well, let's draw the first switch connected in this position and the second switch in this position, where common and L1 are connected on both switches. Current comes in by the line conductor through the ceiling rows, jumps down to L1 on this side. L1 and L1 are connected, so the current jumps across from L1 to L1. This switch is L1's common. This switch is L1's common. The output, if you will, for the light is connected to L2. And L2 is not engaged on this switch and is not engaged on this switch. Therefore, currently the light is off. If somebody flicks the first switch, which on the switch itself will change the position from common to L2, well, now the current can come down to L1 as normal. Doesn't go across to the common because the switch is in the other position, but it does jump across to L1 on the second switch. This switch, however, is connected common to L1, so it comes back out of common, back down to the first switch, where the first switch is common to L2, and therefore the current can go up the neutral conductor, which is sleeved as a switched line conductor, and the light is now on. If somebody then came along and switched this switch to the other position, so common to L2, so now both switches are common to L2, current would come down, can't go from L1 to common, but it can jump across, but it doesn't get anywhere when it gets to this side because the switch is common to L2 on both sides. Therefore, the light would turn off again. And then let's say somebody comes back and switches the first switch. Well, now the current comes down onto L1, can jump across to common and L1. So common and L1 now go across to the second switch. Common on the second switch is now switched, connected to L2. So the current comes back across L2 to the output of the first switch, up the switch line, and then the light is on. There are better videos out there on the internet that draw this and explain it better than I can. But this is what we've been doing at Centre for the last couple of weeks, two-way switching. And I'll put a picture up on the screen now of what the rig looks like. And the last picture I'm going to attempt to draw for you now is two-way plus intermediate. Now this is where you have a third switch in the middle. So say you have a switch at the bottom of the stairs. This switch here is at the top of the stairs, because usually two-way switching is used for landing lights, things like that. But what if you wanted a switch? What if you had a crazy staircase with a landing in the middle, and you wanted a switch in the middle? Well, this is what two-way plus intermediate switching does. Another use for two-way plus intermediate switching is if you have a switch by the front door, a switch at the bottom of the stairs, and then a switch at the top of the stairs. You have a switch in the middle. This switch has got 4 terminals on it. And this foxes a lot of people. So you have L1, L2. Depending on the switch, it might be L3, L4. It might also be L1, L2 on the bottom as well. Well, how do you connect these together? Well, it requires a little bit more thinking and a little bit more planning. Just redraw that neutral in. The common from the first switch to the last switch is connected straight together. So just as before, the common from the first switch to the last switch is connected together, bypassing this intermediate switch. And then L1 plus L2 from the first switch, this is the one at the bottom of the stairs, these are connected, the bottom terminals of the intermediate switch, and then the top terminals of the intermediate switch, well, they're connected like so. This is the grey one, don't forget, because it's dotted, because I haven't got a grey marker. And of course you would sleeve these inside the switch. So this is just a bit of brown sleeving that goes on across. It should give you an idea of how this switch connects inside. Usually, of course, what happens is the 3-core plus earth, it doesn't bypass the switch like that completely. You would normally take the 3-core plus earth from one switch to the other switch, and then from the last switch back to the intermediate switch. And then instead of it going round the switch, inside the back of the switch, it just normally connects together in some sort of junction box or some sort of Wago or something like that. But that doesn't connect into the switch. And so it's more difficult to draw the switching combinations for this setup, but you can appreciate, depending on the combination of the 3 switches, the light is either on or off, and each switch can effectively change the path of the current and turn the switch on or off from any position. Also done in February was our basic ladder and mobile platform training, in no way to replace more advanced and recognised training such as IPAF, the International Powered Access Federation courses. This is a function of the 2365 Level 2 as a basic introduction to assembling and using mobile access platforms at just a few meters high, such as for changing lamps or wiring accessories on a ceiling. The ladder training, again as an introduction, assesses us erecting and using a large extension ladder with the correct height to distance from the wall, 1 to 4 by the way, and to recognise ladder tags and assessing if they are safe to use. Next time I start on power circuits, beginning with radial sockets and consumer units. We start to see those creep into the rigs. I'm going on a journey to update my certifications from having an older domestic installer qualification towards becoming a full-scope modern electrician. If my ramblings interest you and my drawings don't offend you too much and you want to follow along, please consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out, it helps the channel out, it encourages me to carry on. Thanks for watching, and you'll see me next time. And with that, February was done. And so was that. Am I going to try and edit this video now? This could be fun.